Hi, I'm David with EV World News. We talk about electric vehicles, green energy, and the stock markets. And I'm back today with our founder and chief editor, Bill Moore. How's it going today, Bill?
Hey, I've got power.
Yeah, powers plus, internet's a plus.
Plus,
Man,
internet's a plus, and then we even got the audio working. So, no, we had earlier this week, the temperatures were 80 degrees and 70 degrees. The very next day, we had a blizzard. I'm still looking at the storm out here. It was blowing like crazy. I think we had at least 70,000 utility rate, customers had lose power, us being one of them. And it was going off, kind of flickering on and off all afternoon. And then finally, about 4:07, it completely stayed off, and it stayed off until about 7:30, 7:35 in the evening. So yeah, I'm happy.
I went to the gym yesterday.
Yeah.
I went to the gym yesterday. They had no power, so I worked out in the dark. There weren't very many of us, okay, because of how terrible the weather was yesterday. Yeah. Yeah. So we go from 2 days of 80 degrees and sunny to it was right at freezing, but you had 50-mile-per-hour winds with 75-mile-per-hour gusts, and we had several inches of snow, but Lord knows where it went.
Before that, we had thunderstorms, lightning, and hail.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. I got woken up a couple times during the night from the hail. Yeah. Yeah. Freak weather. But we still have a pretty good layer of snow out there.
Yep.
It's warmed up. It's 36 and sunny outside. Most of it's going to burn off, but that's all right. Yeah. So tell me about the rabbit story.
The rabbit. Oh, okay. So I just this week, at Dave's encouragement and frustrations with low band speed and things from the competing provider, I went over to fiber optic. So we just got that installed Tuesday? No, Wednesday, Monday. I'm sorry.
Monday.
So it just came out and they installed it, on Monday. We did our show, right? Yes, on Tuesday. That went fine. And a couple hours later, we suddenly have nothing, no internet, nothing, zip. And so I go and check the boxes downstairs and things. And I go outside and I look at the cable, because this is being put in temporarily until the weather improves and they can dig the trench and lay the conduit and put the cable through it. So it's all kind of temporary. So there's a portion where, to get from our fence corner over to the house, it lays on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So I go out and I look, and up in the yard, near where the thing was, we've got a couple of bunnies that inhabit our yard here, wild rabbit. And I look, I thought, oh, surely, because the technician said, well, we've had problems with squirrels, chewing on them. Turns out that I called up, and surprising, they had a guy out here in half an hour, which is, wow. I don't want to advertise the name because we're not being paid, but.
Right. Yeah, no, I've been impressed with them so far. Yeah, but that wascally wabbit you had.
Wascally rabbit had chewed through the fiber optic cable.
Yeah.
One day after I had it installed, I had to have them come back out and rerun wire. He said, well, I can't really splice it. I have to run new wire. So he did that, and then we're back up when we're running. And of course, then we lose all our power at 4 in the afternoon yesterday. And I'm running, so I figured out, because once you get this little glitch, sometimes the break in the power, whatever that's called, a spike or whatever happens, sometimes that's enough to turn off the modem and the router. So I thought, what I'll do is I went down and got one of my really long outdoor extension cables and ran it from the UPS that powers my desktop computer downstairs, and plugged into one of the things, ran over, and then plugged in the router and the modem into that. So then when we lost power, I still had internet for, I don't know, well, talking about an hour later, the power came on. So I was able to keep working, but, it was an interesting day.
Yeah. Oh, I suspect it was. Yeah, you just never know. They still, I've had mine for probably a month more than you have,
Oh,
and they still haven't come entrenched to bury
yeah,
my cable yet. I've been worried that something's gonna happen like that, and at some point soon we have to start mowing the grass. So,
yeah, exactly.
that's
Yeah, in my case, most of it runs along our, we've got a kind of a picket fence here. So they just
mhm.
strung it through the top rails of the picket fence, except for that portion over here by the gate. And I told him, look, just run it across the top of the gate and, I'll figure out how to get the mower in and out. I'll just take it
Yeah,
to the other side of the house. So,
technology's making our lives easier, right?
yeah,
All right.
exactly.
So, Bill, you sent me this video talking about BYD's success as a bubble waiting to burst. I
Yeah.
wanted to talk about that a little bit. So, for those of you, BYD stands for Build Your Dreams. It's the really big player outside of Tesla in the EV space worldwide. They're producing some of the cheapest mainstream mass production EVs, and they've got a lot of nice higher end models. I mean, they really have a gamut all the way from under $10,000 US to $100,000, and then they have a luxury line too.
Yeah.
So they're kind of hitting stuff all over the board. But they and Tesla compete for number one worldwide in EV sales numbers. And then BYD also makes plug-in hybrids. And they don't make anything else. They don't make just straight gas cars. They don't make just straight
Not
hybrids.
anymore. No.
Just plug-in hybrids and EVs. And anyways, this lady that Bill was recommending, she was talking about, so with Tesla stock declining, and at the same time, BYD, we talked about on Tuesday, has this new charging technology that they're rolling out that they say will add about 50 miles of range for every minute you charge it.
Right.
Okay. So in 5 minutes, you could add 250 miles of range.
Yeah.
And on this news, the BYD stock shot up.
Hmm.
Now, Business Insider praised BYD's 5 charging technology, and it really made the stock shoot up to an all-time high. But her theory is BYD had secured 5.6 billion in financing, and they were oversubscribed by investors. Its expansion model mirrors Evergrande, which is a real estate company that
Yeah.
built all kinds of empty buildings and then didn't do anything.
And has
Um,
basically collapsed the real estate market in China.
yeah. Now, I don't know about the comparison to Evergrande. So it says BYD is relying on high debt and reinvestment, posing liquidity risks. But I suspect they probably have quite a bit of cash that they sit on that,
Well,
for a
yeah,
rainy day.
I don't know. Do they report that? And if they did report it, could I read it because it's in Mandarin or, I don't know. I just found her interesting. I think her name is Lai. That's all, Lai, Real Talk, I think the podcast is called. And you can find a, link on the website. It's probably buried down in the list of stories I posted today. But it's really it's worth a listen to. She is a fluent Chinese speaker. I
Mhm.
assume she's here in the U.S. because I don't know whether she can get away with doing a podcast of this nature, being in China. But it really, I found this interesting because just yesterday I came across a video, supposedly an aerial view of BYD's Guangzhou campus, right? And
Mhm.
it goes on for miles. It's all kinds of flat roof, assembly, looks like assembly manufacturing facilities, and then employee apartment complexes and things. And the headline to this particular video was BYD, the size of the campus is the same size as San Francisco. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But from the aerial, and if that all they're showing is actually the BYD campus, it's huge. And of course, now they're talking about building a factory in, considering building a factory in Europe. I think they were looking at Germany.
Germany.
Yeah. There's talk of doing something in Mexico, although I think that's kind of been put on hold to see what's happening with relations with the U.S. and the Mexican government, and
Aren't they doing something in Turkey?
Pardon?
I think they're building in Turkey, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're doing something with Turkey. So there's a lot going on, and of course, this lady's concerns is the fact that a lot of this is being financed ostensibly on supplier debt
Got
because
it.
because they'll order parts, but and they'll retrieve the parts from the supplier, of which I think they had like, something like 9,000 suppliers, some huge number. And whereas, typical business cycle, to pay bills and things is about 90 days, she says the BYD cycle is over 250 days to pay that. So basically what they're doing is they're squeezing as much as they can out of the suppliers in terms of margins. And then they're not paying them for what, 9 months?
Yeah. Now, to put that in perspective, Walmart pays it 6 months. So if you do a deal with Walmart, you can expect to get paid 180 days.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's always a challenge doing business with Walmart, for instance.
Right.
You start talking 8 to 9 months. Man, that's really getting out there. I mean, you have to have a special relationship with them to be willing to go along with that process.
So basically, this expansion that they're doing is basically being done on the backs of their suppliers, and she's concerned that a lot of this is being driven by incentives from the government, and as those incentives go away, there's becomes the market begins to get smaller and smaller, and that doesn't sustain their current growth model, which is just keep expanding. So it's really an interesting video, and certainly if you're interested in another perspective on BYD, I mean they tend to get a lot of positive spin and publicity. This 1,000 watt or 1,000 amp or what, the 500 kilowatt or 1,000 kilowatts, of energy in 5 minutes and all that. She even points out, and she has a fairly good grasp of the chemistry here, but she even points out that is there anywhere in China where you can charge multiple cars at the same time at that rate? And he says, okay, you could probably do one car, but could you do 20 or 30 cars at a giant, supercharger station?
Well, that's an argument people make already about current Tesla supercharging locations. So you want to be spread out at different ends. If there's one vehicle there, you go to one end to start with. And if the next vehicle goes, they go all the way down on the end. And the next person kind of come in the middle. And you try not to be, even though the thing has it'll charge 2 cars. You try not to have 2 cars on the same one. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, she's not wrong, but that doesn't mean that the technology isn't there. But if you're charging a car in 5 minutes, you're probably not having a lot of cars stacked up at the charging place either.
Well, that's true too. So
there's a difference when it's taking 40 minutes to charge a car and you're filling up the place with cars waiting to charge than getting them out of there in 5 minutes. So that's a big difference there too. But she's also talking about competition, and this is one of the things, like Tesla's having some sales issues, and I guess the big one to me is always the Model S, which was their first one. But there's a lot of cars now that are out there to really compete with the Model S and the same price tier and stuff like that. Right. When you get down to the Model 3 and the Model Y, your competition's a little shakier. Okay, there may be capability, like you can build the Volvo, EX30. Okay, it's cheaper, right? But it's also smaller. So there's a lot of things you can do
Right.
in there. But she's like saying, you've got mid to low end BYD models face competition from local brands like Chery. Well, yeah, I mean, there's 100 Chinese EV manufacturers. I mean, they're
Mhm.
going to face that. The high end models struggle against Tesla and Neo due to weak software and smart driving capabilities. Well, they don't. They're trying to make something that's similar, but nobody really argues. Would you, for the same price, you'd probably buy a Tesla, even if you lived in China, because it's got a higher perceived
Yeah,
value.
and that's a point that she makes. She takes and runs a comparison between comparable BYD and Tesla models, and she notes the fact that as far as the Chinese people are concerned, the Tesla models are quality than the BYD models.
Yeah, I've heard people talk about a BYD feels a lot more like a Toyota. And that's who they're trying to compete with. So they're not really worried so much about, she's trying to compare them to other EV makers, and Toyota's trying to, I mean, I'm sorry, BYD CEO says right out, we're trying to compete with Toyota. We could care less about the other EV makers.
Well, are,
Yeah,
are
and
I guess are they? She has a guy. She has a video on there of a gentleman who, whether she just said, well, he's not really a mechanic. I gather he's a engineer and evaluator or something like that. So
hmm
supposedly he knows cars, and he's talking about the differences between the BYD car that he's looking. Maybe he's the Chinese version of Sandy Monroe. I don't know. But anyway, so says there's this difference and this difference and this difference and this. He says, for example, he says the battery protection pan under the Tesla is metal. The
hmm
same battery protection pan under the BYD car is plastic. And there's just things like that. And he's talking about the different cells and the arrangement and how long those batteries will last. And so again, it's interesting. It might not be a totally accurate perspective on on the two brands, but it's certainly interesting and gives you another perspective. So
No, it sure does. And I guess one of our arguments was that BYD benefits from significant Chinese government subsidies. And if the subsidies decline, then their sales could plummet, and mirroring Evergrande's collapse.
yeah,
So I guess it's one of those things. They've got Warren Buffett as an 8% owner. I mean, I'm sure that
well,
there's probably
I'll
some
ask
things
him.
he's looked
I'll
at.
ask him about that this spring.
There you go.
They
Yeah,
won't let me within 10 feet of him, so 100
you
feet
know,
up.
yeah. The bottom of my Solterra looks like an armored vehicle. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's pretty true of a lot of stuff in the EV space, because you don't want any damage to the batteries,
right.
obviously.
Yeah,
But anyways, I mean, it's an interesting perspective on BYD. It's not one of those stocks I recommend because it's a Chinese stock of people investing in, because you have manipulation from the Chinese government.
yep,
So it's something that can have unusual market conditions
yeah,
compared to American stocks. And I've even seen people debating, should we kick all the Chinese stocks that are on the New York Stock Exchange, like NEO? Should we kick them off so that they're not in our market because of the Chinese government manipulation of some of these things?
yeah, yeah.
And it's an interesting argument. I think we could probably do without them, but at the flip side, the New York Stock Exchange seems to like having them on there. So, I who knows what's going on there. All right, let's go to what everybody in attendance is probably waiting on. They want to know what the oldest electric vehicle was. Okay, so I saw you had this in the list, but during the 19th century, some pioneers like Carl Benz,
Hmm.
Gottlieb Daimler, Samuel Brown, Jean-Joseph Etienne Lenoir, and others harvested the fruits of the Industrial Revolution, creating vehicles powered by steam and internal combustion. However, one of the first practical cars ever invented, Benz's motor wagon, which took its first public test drive in Mannheim, Germany in 1886. So before that, steam had been a viable power source in locomotion, and internal combustion, of course, dominated in the 20th century.
Right.
But long before that, there were some EVs. And let's see what it gives for the entrance. So the 19th century, kind of the start. The
Yeah,
first electric motor was 1837.
Yeah, it's interesting that this particular article goes through the various stages of pieces of the technology that are finally brought together. They start in the early, well, if you include Ben Franklin, even before the 19th century, 17th century. But coming forward, most of that stuff began to be developed in the early half of the 19th century. And then we get to Germany and a gentleman,
Andreas Flocken.
Yeah, Andreas Flocken. Andreas Flocken down in Bavaria is the first person to actually take and tie this all together into an electrowagen.
Yep,
it's the progenitor of the Volkswagen. In this case, it's the electrowagen. This is kind of the early prototype of that vehicle that he drove through Kursburg in 1888. 1888. And then there's that one right there, which is kind of the production model of it, which was, of course, more like an actual carriage. But the thing that the article pointed out, which I thought was kind of interesting, was the fact that this is the age of steam. And so the reporter who reported for the local Kursburg paper, said that he was working on a steam-powered automobile, when in fact he wasn't. He was working on an EV, an electrically powered electric vehicle. So when this thing comes out and takes to the streets of Coburg, there's no hiss, whine, steam, no clanking, things like that. It's just quiet electric. But the other thing is interesting is that he took it out and he drove it across the country to another town nearby, about 15 miles away. And he ran out of charge in his battery. The very first case of range anxiety.
Well, based on the design, I'm pretty sure I noticed on the front it still had the traditional spots to hitch up a horse.
Oh yeah, exactly. You just took bought a carriage maybe from a local carriage maker or whatever, and said, "No, I don't need the horse. I've got a electric motor and some batteries." In fact, I think that earlier photograph you have shows the box on the front of the vehicle where the batteries are. I'm guessing that's what those were, where the batteries are located.
Yeah, it had a 15-mile range.
Pardon?
It had a 15-mile range.
Yeah, 15-mile range, yeah.
But it could achieve a max speed of 9.
Exactly, yeah. Now, what I wonder, see, if it still is a carriage, does it have a tongue, out there where you could hook the horse to and towing back to Korsberg? I don't know. How did he get it back? Or did he find some way to charge the battery there in the neighboring town?
Yeah, let's see. They've got some more. So the EV trend took off. Yeah, so it makes you wonder, EV's just a fad this time around?
Yeah. Well, that's Edison's vehicle.
Yeah,
Edison
so
was working on the battery side of this thing, and
I think you could go about 30 to 40 miles a day on a horse.
Yeah, Edison advertised the fact that this was a 100-mile battery.
Huh.
That his iron battery could take. He was collaborating with Henry Ford. So Thomas Edison. Sorry, I'm saying Thomas Edison is working on the battery, and Ford, of course, working on the car itself.
Oh, here was the original Roadster.
You got a picture of it? Yeah, they actually have the Henry Ford's original quadricycle. Yeah, no, that's the French one. That's the one
For
that broke the 100 kilometer an hour speed in what, like 1906 or something like that. Maybe
oh
even
Lord.
at 1900.
Um, oh no, this was 1899. It was the fastest
Yeah,
car in the world.
1899. Yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, it was really hard to find charging stations back then.
yep.
Yeah, so it's kind of wild to see that. Um,
Looks like a Cybertruck. I actually thought it looks like a bullet, and that's actually that was it. First early efforts at aerodynamics, as a matter of fact.
you know what's funny about that is saying that at the time, recharging a lead acid battery cost about 20 cents per kilowatt. It only is like here in Nebraska, it's only 12.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. At a time when gasoline only cost 5 cents. So um, electricity hasn't changed much in the last 100 years, but gas sure has. Ask any consumer which they preferred, and you would likely got. This is kind of like back then. It was a difference between electric and hydrogen. You know,
yeah.
so much cheaper to do gas. Um, it's just kind of fascinating to see that there was the Flocken Electrowagen.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Flocken
You know,
Electrowagen. Yeah.
oh joy!
Good for
All
him,
right.
man. I love it.
Oh man. Let's oh, did you look at the article about the judge ruling that 9 major companies lied to the public about their
Yes, yes, I
climate
did. Yeah,
impacts? All
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Fraudulent marketing scheme, the
yeah.
judge alleges. Now, this is in Puerto Rico, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So, a preliminary ruling came down from U.S. Magistrate Judge Hector Ramos Vega in San Juan in February. The next step is the federal court. So, 9 oil companies, including Exxon, Chevron, and Shell, face a lawsuit in Puerto Rico based on an accusation that they suppressed clean energy initiatives and misled the public about the dangers of the changing climate. 16 municipalities in Puerto Rico filed the federal lawsuit against a dozen dirty fuel companies, accusing them of a fraudulent marketing scheme to convince people that their products had no effect on climate related weather events like deadly hurricanes Maria and Irma that ravaged the island.
Yep.
I suspect this will probably go nowhere. Okay. I think it's really difficult to prove climate science. There's just too many arguments that are really valid either way that I think it's just really hard to pin stuff on this to the point where you can claim a preponderance of evidence and even in a civil court. Now, when it came to like
You're
coal,
probably right, but I would tend to disagree with you. I think
well, so when we look at coal, okay, so coal absolutely, there's plenty of proof that coal kills people, around the coal
yeah.
factories. And so they've had to really clean that up. And so there's been
So
massive
they created
improvements
clean
in
coal.
the 50 years. Yeah. Yeah, clean coal is a bit of a misnomer, but it's certainly cleaner than it was 50 years ago, right? And I mean, probably by 80% cleaner than it was, but it still, has its negatives. But I think trying to show that the hurricanes were caused by the oil industry, I think is very difficult to.
Probably like we've known for a long, long time that burning of fossil fuels puts not only various toxic pollutants into the air, of which there's a
Mhm.
long list, it also puts CO2 into the air, which increases the concentration of CO2, which increases the greenhouse effect. I mean, we've known that for a long time. And even the oil companies recognized that in the 60s, that
Mhm.
their engineers told them this is an issue we should be concerned about. And of course, management said, nah, just ignore it. So there's evidence that goes back a long time recognizing the fact that taking that, there's a guy named Tom Hart. I don't know if you ever listened to him or not, but he's a radio commentator. And he's written a book, and it was called, I think, something like The Days of Ancient Sunlight. And he makes the comment that all of the energy that we are burning today, be it fossil fuels, be it coal, be it wood pellets, right? All of those combustible fuels started off as sunlight. And it got concentrated in plants, or got concentrated in animals, it got concentrated in algae, whatever. And then over periods of time, that got compressed and compressed and compressed, and finally turned into the fossil fuels that we know and love today, be it coal. I did an interesting thing with last week, actually, with one of my favorite AIs. And we were chatting about the length of time it takes to create these various energy sources. So a wood, if you're going to burn wood, typically wood takes 50 to 200, 300 years for it to mature enough to burn. So we're talking basically decades to a century or more. Then you take a look at peat, which, of course, if you're, about Ireland, they were always, in Scotland, they didn't have a lot of wood that got used up, so they went out and cut peat. Well, peat would take thousands of years on a time scale, from hundreds to thousands of years on a time scale, to get to the point where it can be used to heat their crofts, their little houses. So then the next step is that peat gets compressed and compressed and compressed down to what? Coal. And that takes millions of years to happen. And then the final ultimate one is, of course, petroleum. And that literally takes hundreds of millions into billions of years to make. But it all started at some point as sunshine, as sunlight, as photons coming through space from the sun, hitting the earth and creating plants and animals and so on. So what we're doing now, when we're taking that energy, be it petroleum, be it coal, be it peat, right, or be it wood, we're taking what has taken unimaginable lengths of time, and we're suddenly combusting it and throwing all that material back into our atmosphere that was created over aeons and aeons of time. We're putting it within the blink of an eye back in the atmosphere. That has to have an impact on our climate. There's no way around it.
I mean, it's a reasonable argument. It's just, yeah, well, I'm just saying. But anyways, it's interesting to see. No idea where this is going to go. But they're trying to claim that these were responsible for the two really bad hurricanes that hit Puerto Rico recently. All right, let's talk about aviation. We got kind of a short article. The hidden danger in eVTOL flight, spatial disorientation. Do you want to talk about how spatial disorientation works, Bill?
Okay, so the point that they're making there is that one of the things, and this is sort of true in large airline simulators, but not to the same extent. In a large airline simulator, going into the replica, the forward part of an aircraft, and it's on various types of pumps and levers and hydraulic jacks and things, and you can sort of simulate in that the movement of that aircraft, but it's never quite the same as what you would expect from real flight. And this becomes exaggerated now when you're trying to learn how to fly these new electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, because they have the ability to make these sudden shifts and movements, which the human body and our balancing system isn't able to keep up with, because basically what's happening is you've got little hairs in your ear that are kind of moving around, and that's what's sort of giving you the sense of balance. So their point here is that we need to very carefully train people, and they need to create, if you will, dual control versions of these aircraft, so that a pilot can have another pilot with them and they can get adapted and learn how to respond to these potential rapid changes in, direction and velocity. Otherwise, the human body gets thrown off, and that cannot be a good thing. Now, what happens? Some of these are being developed that are autonomous. So there's EHang over in China, and I think there's some other companies here in Europe and the U.S. that are developing autonomous vehicles. You don't need a pilot. You just
Right.
I think Whisker is one of those that's being developed with Boeing, and it's just you're a passenger, and the pilot is a robot. The circuitry in the aircraft. So I'm sure they're going to have to learn how to program that thing so that it doesn't make any kind of abrupt changes, because that's going to disorient the passenger, and they're going to be vomiting all over the place.
Oh Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
motion sickness.
Yeah. So this is just bring this up because we've got these air taxis that are being developed, for markets that they hope exist. I mean, the latest is which one is it now? Archer, I think, has done a deal with Virgin Atlantic to operate routes out of London to various cities around the southern part of England, so that you don't have to take a Uber or wait for the train or whatever. So you've got that happening, and we just want pilots to be able to be experienced enough to be able to handle and know what to expect if those changes come about, so they don't get disoriented.
Are robot fighter planes already better than ace pilots in dogfighting? Well, I don't know. I mean, the problem is dogfighting doesn't really exist anymore. So in modern aerial combat, you shoot missiles from 50 miles away or 100 miles away, and you don't ever get that close. So that's in theory that was supposed to happen in Vietnam, right? The original F-4 Phantoms didn't have guns, and but some of them did, because one of my friends flew an F-4, and I think he shot down a MiG with guns.
Yeah, there were instances where they had aerial dogfights in Vietnam, and they had to use whatever Gatling guns or
cannon. Yeah, I was listening to that TV show Aces that was on the History Channel or something like that, and I wasn't watching, and I heard a voice, and I'm like, man, that sounds familiar. And I looked around, I knew the guy that was on the screen. It was one of my tennis friends, but he had shot down 2 MiGs over Vietnam.
Yeah,
and he one of them was a MiG-21, and the North Vietnamese only had something like 19 or 20 of those. So the fact that he got one of them was a pretty big deal. But I think the other one was probably an older MiG of some sort. But they used to run little tricks where they'd make it look like the B-52s went out by themselves, and they'd hide somewhere, and so that they could, because the MiGs would only come out if it didn't look like they had fighter escort.
Yeah, I just watched I think it was like an hour-long YouTube video here. Was it yesterday when we were getting all the snow and stuff like that on the P-80 Shooting Star, the history of the P-80 Shooting Star, and that was the first jet aircraft to see aerial combat in Korea. And of course, that was subsequently replaced because it had its ways it could deal with MiGs, but the MiGs were just far superior to them. And of course,
didn't the P-80, wasn't that one invented? It was invented in World War II.
Oh, it was, yeah. It actually did the very first flight in, I think it was 1944. So
I remember, because they sent some to Europe and they all crashed.
There were 4. There were 2 sent to England. There were 2 sent to Italy. Of the 3 that were there, the only one that survived to come back to the U.S. was one of the ones out of Italy. The others had various mishaps, and So there's only 4 that they sent over, because that's all that at that point in time, that was the inventory. Those were all prototype development aircraft, and Hap Arnold said, hey, we need them in Europe because our pilots are being, we're being outclassed by the Messerschmitt ME, 262. So
Yeah, the thing is, at the end of the war, the P-47M version was almost as fast as an ME-262 because they tuned some of those up so they'd go over 500 miles per hour.
there's a photograph in this video where there are two of those P-80s flying in formation with two P-47s. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, that was almost the same. I wouldn't doubt that about, in a dogfight type maneuvering situation that the AI might be able to figure out how to outfly a human. And a lot of that would probably be because the human is dealing with G forces and the AI would not. And so, there's probably something to that. But, like I
And the
said, now
ability
that's
to,
not the thing so much.
yeah, and the ability to basically process much more data in a extremely short amount of time,
Yes.
and react, and then have the aircraft react to that. So yeah, I could see that happening. Although I'm sure there are probably things where the human intuition would end up being superior to the programming in the aircraft or in the bot. So I don't know.
Um,
I really
are-
don't want to see that. You know, there. Oh, I don't know if you've seen the latest. And I don't know whether it's real or whether it's been animated, using CGI. But the Boston Dynamics robot, humanoid robot, it is frightening.
oh yeah, I've seen some of them. They're using it to go out and shoot guns
Oh
and
well, no,
and
not
do
that.
hand-to-hand combat.
That particular video that I saw was all CG. But this is a supposedly Boston Dynamics, and it is doing bodily maneuvers and handsprings and stuff that even the best human would have difficulty doing. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, some of that stuff the robots are doing now is really amazing.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety
Yeah.
every year upgrades its standards. Now, that doesn't mean that if you have an old safe car, it's not safe anymore. They keep saying there's new stuff coming out every year and keep raising the bar on vehicle safety. And so this is very interesting. They got their safest cars you can buy in 2025. Okay. And this is kind of interesting because there's some notable cars missing and some that are surprisingly
Yeah.
in here. So the safest small cars, this is small cars, are the Honda Civic hatchback, the Mazda 3 hatchback, and the Mazda 3 sedan. You don't hear much about Mazda. I couldn't tell you the last time. I mean, there's not a whole lot of, there's a couple of Mazda EVs that have been kind of nothing burgers.
Yeah.
But you don't see much about that. So that's in the small cars. Go up to mid-sized cars: Honda Accord, Toyota Camry, Hyundai Ioniq 6. So we got one EV there.
One EV, yeah.
The out of the three, these supposed to be the three safest. Okay, we don't know what comes in fourth, fifth, or anything like that. Now, when we get to the safest mid-size luxury car, there's only one brand. It's the Mercedes C-Class. Okay, there was no other vehicles. Apparently, the C-Class stood out all on its own.
It's in a class of its own. Yeah,
it's in a class of its own. All right. And I've seen that in the past. That's one of the big things Mercedes has always pushed, safety. They used to have that cool commercial showing the G-Wagon with the dummies slam into a brick wall and go right through it, and the dummies kept on driving outside the factory. They busted through the factory wall, and the dummies drive off in it. Let me see. Now, the safest small SUVs. Now, there's a whole bunch here. This is kind of funny. Small SUVs: the Genesis GV60, Honda HR-V, Hyundai Ioniq 5, Hyundai Kona, Hyundai Tucson, Mazda CX-30, Mazda CX-50, and the Subaru Solterra. So there you go, Owen. You probably like to see that. What's funny is what vehicle is the same as the Subaru Solterra? The Toyota Busy Forks? It's not on the list.
Yeah.
Yeah, so something is different there. Mid-size SUVs, the Mustang Mach-E. That's nice to see that. The Hyundai Santa Fe, if built after November 2024.
Yeah, I thought that's interesting. You wait till you get to the Rivian.
Oh, okay. The Kia EV9, the Kia Telluride. So Hyundai and Kia doing pretty good on this list.
Really good, yeah.
Mazda CX-70, including plug-in hybrid. Mazda CX-90, including plug-in hybrid. And the Nissan Pathfinder. I didn't even know they still made the Pathfinder. Maybe they just brought it back. Mid-size luxury SUVs. BMW X5. That's kind of always been on the list there. That's always been a real safe vehicle. The Genesis electrified GV70 and the gas G70, if it was built since April of last year. The GV80, the Lincoln Nautilus, Mercedes-Benz GLC and GLE, Volvo XC90. Now we get to large. The safest large SUVs you can buy are the Audi Q7, Infiniti QX80, or the Rivian R1S if built since August of 2024.
Yeah.
Man, that's really getting specific.
What changed? Yeah.
Yeah. And pickup trucks, there's only one, the Toyota Tundra.
Huh.
Yeah. So there was no Teslas on the list. Now, previously, the Model Y has been listed as the safest car on the road. And so it makes you wonder, what's changed there, right? So there was no Teslas included in this
in the list, yeah.
In the list, which is really odd because it's for quite a while it's been considered to be the safest vehicles made. It's not saying that Teslas aren't safe, just saying that somehow these vehicles are even safer.
Aren't meeting the older Teslas aren't meeting the standards that IIHs. That, by the way, that's International Insurance Highway Safety, I think is that what the acronym is.
Yeah, but anyways, all right. Well, Bill, that's all we got for today, folks. I appreciate y'all chiming in. And
thank you for coming in, Owen. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, and Paul. But anyways, we will be back on Tuesday next week, and hopefully we'll have power and internet and all those useful things that help to make this show work.
Chewing through the cable again.
All right, folks. Have a